Hey everyone, it's your average chess player here. Today we are going to see an endgame study. This one is from the dvoretskys endgame manual. I came across this position in a Reddit post, and I thought I'll try to solve this and share how I solve this in this video. It is White's turn to play, and White has to win. This position was shared, I think, because it was kind of peculiar because white has a light squared bishop and the pawn is going to queen in a dark square. So the initial impression which I had was the position is a draw. But like the post said, like it's white's turn to play and win, which I did not believe until I actually sat and calculated a bunch of moves, and then I was like, oh yeah, it is winning. So let's do it. The first issue that I saw was if it was black's turn to move, for example, black would want to play king g1 to take this pawn off. That would be like the elimination of the pawn would be black's first condition to draw. That's the first condition. The second way black can draw this game is if the black king gets to h8. So because this is a pawn on the h file or the a file, the rook's file, if the opposing king gets into this corner, it is almost always a draw unless I had like a dark squared bishop here which can control the square, or my king kind of gets there first or takes control of these squares first and is able to drive the black king away. So that is the only way for um like white to avoid black drawing the game. But black's win condition is simple: eliminate the pawn or get to h8. That's it. Everything else is for black. Objectively doesn't matter. So if black goes to g1, this pawn is lost. That means if I make a move like king d3 just to bring the king closer to the center, I can just play king g1, take the pawn in the next move. So we cannot move the king immediately as white. That is known. That means we have to move the bishop because that is the only piece that we can move legally. But also for the fact that only if we move the bishop, this pawn can move on the next turn, and black cannot play something like king g1 and take the pawn. So my first move that I wanted to check was bishop f1 because I thought it was kind of clever to do this. Um, if you play king takes f1, which was my first obvious tactic, is I can just now play h4 and then I just queen the pawn. Black king cannot catch up. See, too many squares. And also like black cannot play king g1 here because again I'll keep pushing the pawn, and this is the same thing, which leaves us with just like two squares, f3 and e3. Both of them would give you the same conclusion, but the first time when I calculated this, I did calculate f3 because I wanted to be clever and play bishop e2. The reason was in this position, if you see, this bishop is covering g2, so the king cannot come closer, and the pawn is protecting g3, so the king cannot go there either. So with bishop, and the bishop also controls g4. So with bishop f1, king f3, we are giving access for black to access g4. So if I play bishop e2, I take away that square. So I thought I was being clever, and then when black goes to f4, I was like, I'll play h4. Now I built a wall here instead of here, and now if you play king g3, I keep pushing my pawn, and you cannot come in. And I thought this was winning. But what I didn't see is like I should go one move further, where if black plays king f5, I reach an impasse because black now is threatening to play king g6. So what I assumed from looking at the position is if black gets to the g file, there's no way for me to prevent black from going to the h file, and it automatically becomes a draw because we are giving access to the h8 square anyway. Now I thought I can prevent this from by playing bishop g6 and taking control of both g6 and g4, kind of building the same kind of a wall that we had here. But now black has access to f6, again the dark square. So f6, and now king can go to g7 and h8, and it's a draw. So when I did this, this is when I realized the fact that, okay, let's go all the way back with bishop f1. I realized black's main objective to draw this game, like apart from the two winning conditions, is going to be just to operate on dark squares. Black wood is not even going to worry about getting into the light squares unless absolutely needed. Because like, and now with white, I realized, okay, so I can control, since black is going to only operate on the dark squares because my bishop can control the light squares, I need to use my king and my pawn to control the dark squares when needed. So for example, my pawn should be on h4 to control g5 at some point, and it should now go to h6 to control g7 at some point. So those two are the things that I realized from the first variation I calculated, because the king was on g5, wanted to go to g5, but then it went to f5, and then it went to f6. And once it went to f6, my pawn was still stuck on h4 and it couldn't move to h6, so I couldn't control g7. So that was the problem there. So that's what I realized here. And we will go to one more variation, two more variations before we get to the solution. So the next variation that I saw was bishop g2. With the same idea, if you take here, I play h4 and a queen. I was also like trying to see like, hey, if I take away f3, then you don't have this f4 coming to f4, coming to f5, and going to f6. You don't have the you can't do that. And g1 is the same h4 idea, king g1. So king e3 is forced. And now I was like, okay, you come to f4 and then you go to g5. You could try doing that. So I thought, okay, h4 first. And if you come to f4, maybe I can do something. But then I realized it's the same thing. Black can now play king f5. Like even if I play bishop f3, sacrificing the bishop, black is not going to go for it. Just king f5, and I kind of run into the same problem because black has now control to the g file and I cannot defend all the squares. So I realized none of these work. None of these two moves work. So I immediately went to bishop c8. You could do it in any order: g4, f5, e6 first, or even d7 first. I went to c8 because I did this extreme, so I thought I'll do that extreme and see if that gives me some other ideas in the position. So the first thing that I noticed here was the fact that if black plays king f3, then I could play h4, but then I realized I run into the same problem where potentially the same problem where black can play now king f4, and then like white cannot play h5 because we're giving away g5 square, but the bishop is also controlling this diagonal. Then I thought, oh, okay, so the only other problem that I have apart from g5, like we saw this diagonal as a way of control, so this diagonal is also a way of control. So if I take away e5 from black, then I could potentially win the game. So I thought, okay, king d4. So this works. Now all these three squares are controlled. So black cannot come forward. Black has to go back, and then I queen the pawn. I was like, oh, so this must be the winning move. So I like, okay, let me just check what I calculated. Okay, bishop c8. Then I calculated king f3. Okay, so if I go king f3, I'm already giving a chance for the white king to play king d4 now, like we saw in the previous variation. So because I thought king f3, instead of king d4, I thought, oh, okay, h4, then king f4, and then I thought of king d4. What if just king f3, king d4 right away? Then I take away e5, and king f4, h4 will put black in the same position. So I was like, oh, okay, so black cannot allow the king to go to d4. So black has to play king e3. Okay, so if black plays king e3, preventing d4, now what happens if I play h4? Then I realized if I play king f4 here, then we reach the same position with the wall here. So that is not the right move. So I was saying black will operate on all the dark squares and will move to a light square only if really needed. So in this position, you can play king e4. So once you play king e4, I already have control of the d4 square, and I'm going to play king e5 eventually, and then just go in. So if you play h5, I play king e5 because I cannot go into this diagonal. And if I play this, I'm behind the pawn. So I need to keep up with the pawn. Now if you play like h6, I come in. Whatever you play, I keep coming in. So even if you play like something like bishop f5, I play king f7, and then I get through to h8 that way. So when I calculated this part, this is the part where I realized the remaining nuance that I required. So I knew that, okay, so black, even if black gains access to e5, I still need to be able to I need to see if this portion can be still guarded. And then when I went further in the variation with king e5, h6, and king f6, I realized, oh, if I was in a position to prevent the king from coming in this way, because we have reached a position where, yes, we are covering g7, but we are not covering f7 and g6. My bishop is stuck here, and my bishop can only protect one of these two squares. It can play, like, I can play bishop e6 and like control f7, so the king can play to g6, and or bishop f5 and control g6, but the black king can go to f7. So black king has two ways to get into h8 or catch up to the pawn, both are which like I said, win conditions. So that's when I realized, okay, so my bishop has to be in a position where I can kind of control these two squares and I have to reach the same position that I'm reaching here. That is kind of key. So let's go all the way back. So bishop c8 almost works if black misplaces it, but it looks like if black plays the right move, sticking to his own plan, it works. So that is when I landed with the move bishop d7. And if you have reached this part of the video, I have to tell you this is the right move. And if you did it, give yourself a pat on the back, especially if you found it immediately. Because there are like few other moves, bishop e6, f5, and g4, but all of them would run into the same problems. You can try to play it against yourself or even a computer and try to find the refutation as black, but all of them have similar ideas like what I said with bishop c8. So bishop d7, it works because the variation that we saw with bishop c8 will not work here, and I'll show you how. So king e3 is the move. If you play king f3, then I have king d4 and e5 is taken, and with this I have h4, and we reach the similar position just with the bishop on d8, d7 instead of c8. So king e3, black wants to form that wall against the white king, and now I have to play h4 so that I'm like threatening to like queen my pawn. And if I play king f4, then we run into the same problem with the wall here, with the king goes to d4. So king e4 is a forced move, and now black is threatening to play king e5, f6, g7, and h8. We already saw this variation with the bishop on c8, so let's push the pawn. This bishop is covering this diagonal. King cannot go here because it cannot catch up to the pawn, has to keep up. King e5, h6, and king f6. So now we reach this position with the bishop on d7 instead of c8. And like I said, we want the pawn to be at the right time in the right squares. It is at h6 guarding g7, which is the next square that we need protection from. Now we have the main and the star move and the final move that we needed to find, which is bishop e8, because it now protects f7, g6, and like it's covering the entire diagonal, and the pawn is protecting g7. Now the black king is out of squares to get to reach the pawn, and it is no longer viable. In the previous variation, like I said, like because the bishop was stuck on c8, it could not access both these squares, but now in this variation it can. Now sample variation is just like king e7, but then I h7 takes, and then I queen, and then from this here it's like an elementary checkmate. So that is the puzzle. It's a very nuanced puzzle, but once you see, maybe like if you don't see the pattern right away, once you start calculating, you immediately realize the concept of important key squares, or like weak squares, important squares, what are you want to call them, of like all the key squares that we have just in this position was e5, and then which is like a key way for white to capitalize if black was just playing in the f file, or black to make sure he plays accurately by playing king e3, king e4 when needed, just to prevent the, and then go to e5 to prevent the white king from coming into d4 and taking control. So e5 was an important square, and then g5 and g7 were the other important squares to control, dark squares to control with the pawn and then the king if needed, and all the light squares were controlled by the bishop. And in the final position, which we saw with king e4 here, the key move was bishop e8, again forming the same like a similar wall that we have, like that we had here with on g3 and g2, and we are trying to cut off the king to accessing any of the squares around the pawn so that you cannot catch up to the pawn. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is my first video in a while, and I'm hoping to post more soon. But if you like this video, subscribe to the channel and like on the video would be nice. Thank you. See you in the next one.